So like if you have an LLM trained on a bunch of books that cover different economics theories, and then you have those LLMs just talk to each other, like reason, the way we kind of debate each other as humans on Twitter, in formal debates, in podcast conversations, we kind of have little kernels of wisdom here and there. But if you can like 1,000x speed that up, can you actually arrive somewhere new? Like, what's the point of conversation, really?
Well, you can tell when you're talking to somebody, you can tell. Sometimes you have a conversation, you're like, wow, this person does not have any original thoughts. They are basically echoing things that other people have told them. There's other people you can have a conversation with where it's like, wow, like they have a model in their head of how the world works, and it's a different model than mine. And they're saying things that I don't expect. And so I need to now understand how their model of the world differs from my model of the world. And then that's how I learn something fundamental, right? Underneath the words.
Well, I wonder how consistently and strongly can an LLM hold on to a worldview. You tell it to hold on to that and defend it for your life. Because I feel like they'll just keep converging towards each other. They'll keep convincing each other, as opposed to being stubborn assholes the way humans can.
So you can experiment with this now. I do this for fun. So you can tell GPT-4, whatever, debate X, X and Y, communism and fascism or something, and it'll go for a couple of pages, and then inevitably it wants the parties to agree.
Yeah.
And so they will come to a common understanding. And it's very funny if these are like emotionally inflammatory topics, because they're like somehow the machine is just it figures out a way to make them agree. But it doesn't have to be like that, and because you can add to the prompt. I do not want the conversation to come to agreement. In fact, I want it to get more stressful, right, and argumentative, right, as it goes. Like I want tension to come out. I want them to become actively hostile to each other. I want them to not trust each other, take anything at face value.
Yeah,
and it will do that. It's happy to do that.
So it's going to start rendering misinformation about the other, but it's going to.
Well, you can steer it. You can steer it, or you could steer it and you could say, I want it to get as tense and argumentative as possible, but still not involve any misrepresentation. I want, both sides to, you could say, I want both sides to have good faith. You could say, I want both sides to not be constrained to good faith. In other words, like you can set the parameters of the debate and it will happily execute whatever path, because for it, it's just like predicting, it's totally happy to do either one. It doesn't have a point of view. It has a default way of operating, but it's happy to operate in the other realm. And so and this is how I, when I want to learn about a contentious issue, this is what I do now this is what I ask it to do. And I'll often ask it to go through 5, 6, 7, different, sort of continuous prompts and basically, okay, argue that out in more detail. Okay. No, this argument's becoming too polite, make it more, make it tenser. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's thrilled to do it. So it has the capability for sure.
How do you know what is true? So this is a very difficult thing on the internet, but it's also a difficult thing. Maybe it's a little bit easier, but I think it's still difficult. Maybe it's more difficult. I don't know, with an LLM to know that it just makes some shit up as I'm talking to it. How do we get that right? Like as you're investigating a difficult topic, because I find that LLMs are quite nuanced in a very refreshing way. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't feel biased. Like when you read news articles and tweets and just content produced by people, they usually have this, you can tell they have a very strong perspective where they're not stealing, manning the other side, they're hiding important information or they're fabricating information in order to make their argument stronger. There's just like that feeling. Maybe it's a suspicion, maybe it's mistrust. With LLMs, it feels like none of that is there. It's just kind of like, here's what we know. But you don't know if some of those things are kind of just straight up made up.
Yeah, so several layers to the question. So one of the things that an LLM is good at is actually deep biasing. So you can feed it a news article and you can tell it strip out the bias.
Yeah, that's nice, right?
And it actually does it. Like it actually knows how to do that because it knows how to do, among other things, it actually knows how to do sentiment analysis. And so it knows how to pull out the emotionality.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things you can do. It's very suggestive of the sense here that there's real potential in this issue. I would say, look, the second thing is there's this issue of hallucination, right? And there's a long conversation that we could have about that.
Hallucination is coming up with things that are totally not true but sound true.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's sort of, hallucination is what we call it when we don't like it. Creativity is what we call it when we do like it, right?
Brilliant,
right? And so when the engineers talk about it, they're like, "This is terrible. It's hallucinating," right? If you have artistic inclinations, you're like, "Oh my God, we've invented creative machines for the first time in human history. This is amazing."
Or bullshitters.
Well, bullshitters, but also
in the good sense of that word.
There are shades of gray though. It's interesting. So we had this conversation. We're looking at my firm at AI and lots of domains, and one of them is the legal domain. So we had this conversation with this big law firm about how they're thinking about using this stuff, and we went in with the assumption that an LLM that was going to be used in the legal industry would have to be 100% truthful, right? Verified. There's this case where this lawyer apparently submitted a GPT generated brief, and it had like fake legal case citations in it, and the judge is gonna get his law license stripped or something, right? So like we just assumed it's like obviously they're going to want the super literal, like one that never makes anything up, not the creative one. But actually they said what the law firm basically said is, yeah, that's true at like the level of individual briefs, but they said when you're actually trying to figure out like legal arguments, right, like you actually want to be creative, right? You don't, again, there's creativity and then there's like making stuff up. Like, what's the line? You actually want to be, you want it to explore different hypotheses, right? You want to do kind of the legal version of like improv or something like that, where you want to float different theories of the case and different possible arguments for the judge and different possible arguments for the jury. And by the way, different routes through the, sort of history of all the case law. And so they said, actually, for a lot of what we want to use it for, we actually want it in creative mode. And then basically we just assume that we're going to have to cross-check all of the, all the specific citations. And so I think there's going to be more shades of gray in here than people think. And then I just add to that, another one of these $1 trillion kind of questions is ultimately, sort of the verification thing. And so, will LLMs be evolved from here to be able to do their own factual verification? Will you have sort of add-on functionality like Wolfram Alpha, right? Where, and other plugins where that's the way you do the verification. Another idea is you might have a community of LLMs on any, so for example, you might have the creative LLM and then you might have the literal LLM fact check it. Right. And so there's a variety of different technical approaches that are being applied to solve the hallucination problem. Some people like Jan LeCun argue that this is inherently an unsolvable problem, but most of the people working in the space, I think that there's a number of practical ways to kind of corral this in a little bit.
Yeah. If you were to tell me about Wikipedia before Wikipedia was created, I would have laughed at the possibility of something like that being possible. Just a handful of folks can organize, write, and moderate with a mostly unbiased way the entirety of human knowledge. I mean, so if there's something like the approach that Wikipedia took possible for LLMs, that's really exciting.
Well,
I think that's possible.
And in fact, Wikipedia today is still not deterministically correct, right? So you cannot take to the bank, right, every single thing on every single page, but it is probabilistically correct. Right. And specifically the way I describe Wikipedia to people, it is more likely that Wikipedia is right than any other source you're going to find.
Yeah.
It's this old question, right? Of like, okay, like, are we looking for perfection? Are we looking for something that asymptotically approaches perfection? Are we looking for something that's just better than the alternatives? And Wikipedia, right, has exactly your point, has proven to be like overwhelmingly better than people thought. And I think that's where this ends. And then underneath all this is the fundamental question of where you started, which is, okay, what is truth? Mm-hmm. How do we get to truth? How do we know what truth is? And we live in an era in which an awful lot of people are very confident that they know what the truth is. And I don't really buy into that. And I think the history of the last, 2,000 years or 4,000 years of human civilization is actually getting to the truth is actually a very difficult thing to do.
Are we getting closer? If we look at the arc of human history, are we getting closer to the truth?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it possible that we're getting very far away from the truth because of the internet, because of how rapidly you can create narratives and just as the entirety of a society just move like crowds in a hysterical way along those narratives that don't have a necessary grounding in whatever the truth is?
Sure. But we came up with communism before the internet somehow, right? Which was, I would say, had rather larger issues than anything we're dealing with today.
It had, in the way it was implemented, it had issues.
And its theoretical structure, it had like real issues. It had like a very deep fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and economics.
Yeah, but those folks sure were very confident it was the right way.
They were extremely confident. And my point is they were very confident 3,900 years into what we would presume to be evolution towards the truth.
Yeah.
And so my assessment is number one, there's no need for there's no need for the Hegelian dialectic to actually converge towards the truth. Mm-hmm. Like apparently not.
So why are we so obsessed with there being one truth? Is it possible there's just going to be multiple truths, like little communities that believe certain things? And
I think it's just, no, number one, I think it's just really difficult. Like who gets, historically, who gets to decide what the truth is? It's either the king or the priest, right? Like, and so we don't live in an era anymore of kings or priests dictating it to us. And so we're kind of on our own. And so my typical thing is like, we just need a huge amount of humility. And we need to be very suspicious of people who claim that they have the capital truth. And then we need to have, and look, the good news is the Enlightenment has bequeathed us with a set of techniques to be able to presumably get closer to truth through the scientific method and rationality and observation and experimentation and hypothesis. And, we need to continue to embrace those even when they give us answers we don't like.
Sure, but the internet and technology has enabled us to generate a large number of content that data that the scientific process allows us sort of damages the hope laden within the scientific process. Because if you just have a bunch of people saying facts on the internet, and some of them are going to be LLMs, how is anything testable at all, especially that involves like human nature, things like this? So it's not physics.
Here's a question a friend of mine just asked me on this topic. So suppose you had LLMs in equivalent of GPT-4 or even 5, 6, 7, 8. Suppose you had them in the 1600s.
Yeah.
And Galileo comes up for trial.
Yeah.
Right. And you ask the LLM, like, is Galileo right?
Yeah.
Like, what does it answer? Right. And one theory is it answers no, that he's wrong, because the overwhelming majority of human thought up until that point was that he was wrong. And so therefore, that's what's in the training data.
Yep.
Another way of thinking about it is, well, a sufficiently advanced LLM will have evolved the ability to actually check the math, right? And will actually say, actually, no, actually, you may not want to hear it, but he's right.
Yeah.
Now, if, the church at that time was, owned the LLM, they would have given it human feedback to prohibit it from answering that question. Yeah. Right. And so I like to take it out of our current context because that makes it very clear. Those same questions apply today. Right. This is exactly the point of a huge amount of the human feedback training that's actually happening with these LLMs today. This is a huge debate that's happening about whether open source, AI should be legal.
Well, the actual mechanism of doing the human RL with human feedback seems like such a fundamental and fascinating question. How do you select the humans?
Exactly.
Yeah, how do you select the humans?
AI alignment, right? Which everybody is like, oh, that sounds great. Alignment with what? Human values. Whose human values?
Whose human values?
And so we're in this mode of social and popular discourse where there's you see this. What do you think of when you read a story in the press right now and they say XYZ made a baseless claim about some topic, right? Mm-hmm. And there's one group of people who are like, aha, they're doing fact checking. There's another group of people that are like, every time the press says that, it's now a tick, and that means that they're lying, right? So we're in this social context where there's the level to which a lot of people in positions of power have become very, very certain that they're in a position to determine the truth for the entire population is there's some bubble that has formed around that idea. And at least it flies completely in the face of everything I was ever trained about science and about reason. And strikes me as deeply offensive and incorrect.